Happy New Year. My name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Thank you for taking a moment to click the like button, to click on that subscribe button, and to click the bell icon to be reminded of upcoming episodes.
That's right. So each week, Todd, Leonard, and I, for those of you who are familiar with the channel, we talk about the upcoming gospel lectionary reading for the weekend that's approaching, and our goal is to talk about that reading in the context of love and inclusion and societal justice. Our hope is that our conversation will be just, as in just talking, justice talking, but also that something we might say during this time would inspire you alongside with us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what passage are we looking at this week?
We're actually taking on two um, Matthew 2 1 through 12 and Mark 1 4 through 11.
That's right. So, Matthew 2 1 through 12 is Epiphany. It's the three wise men, the we three kings.
Hmm.
Any thoughts there?
Um, I'm sure you've got to have some great
That
insight.
I have three things that I want to talk about, but I thought I would defer and let you go first if you had something.
I have nothing. I know what you're gonna. I know where you're headed, so I'm interested in hearing you bring it up, and then I'll
So the
jump in on
first
it.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about with the Magi, with the three wise men, or at least the three gifts. We don't know how many wise men there were. But with the Magi is this appearance of this star, which is what they called comets then. Um, so we talked about this a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Caesar and the coins, and in Jewish mythos or in Jewish in their narratives that they continue to tell to support Rome, their storytelling. When Julius Caesar was murdered, after his death, in July after his death, there was a comet that appeared in the night sky. And a lot of folks, well, that were in power, that were fans of Caesar's, started selling this idea that this star was the spirit, the divine spirit of Julius Caesar, that was being placed into the heavens. And Publius Ovidius Naso wrote in Metamorphosis, he writes, "Then Jupiter, the Father, spoke, 'Take up Caesar's spirit from his murdered corpse and change it into a star, so that the deified Julius may always look down from his high temple on our capital and forum.' He had barely finished when gentle Venus stood in the midst of the Senate, seen by no one, and took up the newly freed spirit of her Caesar from his body, and preventing it from vanishing into the air, carried it toward the glorious stars. As she carried it, she felt it glow and take fire, and loosed it from her breast. It climbed higher than the moon, and drawing behind it a fiery tail, shone as a star." So when Augustus, Julius's son, um, or adopted son, when Augustus minted coins to prove his own divinity or connection to divinity, on the front it said, Augustus, son of the divine Caesar, son of God. But on the back, it had minted the Julian star, and that's what it came to be known as. Is either the Julian star or the star of Julius Caesar. So again, that kind of astronomical sign or event that was always tied to in the politics of Rome. Those things were tied to leaders, people in power, things to bolster and to support the Pax Romana. That was kind of the rhetoric that sold it. And I'm grappling for the right term there, but that was their pitch. That was
Hmm.
the stuff they told, their religion, their political religion or civic religion. These were their stories. And so Matthew, whoever Matthew's author is, Matthew's gospel picks up this idea from Roman culture, and but now it's not a comet or a star appearing at a Caesar's death, but at King Jesus's birth. Remember, Jesus is going to, and this is written for a primarily Jewish audience, Jesus is going to be teaching about a kingdom as an alternative to the Roman Empire as an option. So again, they're placing Jesus on the same level as Caesar here. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, again, this is for some people will be startling information, um, and uh, and maybe again initially cause you to question, because it sounds like, oh, this the author is just is just copying other mythology and is creating a new mythology for Jesus. And so therefore, this is, now that I know this invalidates the story of
Mm.
Jesus. And you can't look at it that way, because that's not the intent of the author. The intent of the author is to actually elevate the story of Jesus by attaching to it a mythology, because the the ministry of Jesus was so extraordinary in 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 what it was, that the author is using the is co-opting the mythology in a sense to elevate,
Mhm.
uh, and to highlight who Jesus is. So you have to understand the literary purpose of doing that, is not, uh, it doesn't, we want in today's culture here, we would want everything to be original and unique to us telling a remarkable person's story. But in this time and place, it is that the writers are intentionally hearkening to the culture, but then using it to turn it into, uh, actually an act of treachery, in the sense of, it's elevating an opposing kingdom in the person of Jesus that is superior to the Roman Empire.
That's right. It's you have to look at it, and I love what you said there from the intent of the author. It's not this wasn't a story not written in a culture like ours today, and it does kind of accomplish multiple things. Number one, Jesus is going to offer an alternative to the Roman Empire, an alternative way of shaping human communities. And to the question that would be asked, well, who are you to stand up to Rome and to Caesar? Well, here Jesus had the this is that lifting up and placing him on a level where he could compete with Caesar. Number
Mm-hmm.
two, if you're going to tell stories like this that make someone as big a deal as Jesus was, in that culture's storytelling, it had to check off certain boxes. It had to be a certain kind of story. And that does that. And number three, what it does is it gives us direction now in how to interpret the Jesus story, and this is where it means the most to
Mm,
me, is
mhm,
that this isn't just a story about, you know, can't do anything about the way things are. It's just about getting your soul to heaven.
mm,
And that don't challenge, don't confront, don't seek to
mhm,
change anything in the here and now. Just make sure your soul is guaranteed safety in the afterlife.
mm,
That's not what this story is doing. By placing Jesus in direct comparison and contrast and competition with the Roman Empire, it's hinting to its audience, hey, this story is about the here and now. There's something other than the
mhm,
Roman Empire. It would be like saying to people in America today, there's another way than capitalism. That's
mhm,
hard for us to imagine, but there's a
mhm,
better way. It confronts the way things are in the here and now. So it's again, it's kind of like lifting that beacon saying, this is the direction we're to be reading this story in and interpreting it. How does it affect our life right now?
mm, mhm. Yeah, it's good. And then you see more connections to other stories with the same passage.
Yeah, so when Cyrus, and we have to understand again, Matthew was written to a primarily Jewish audience. And one of the great liberators of the Jewish people was the Persian Emperor Cyrus. He was the one to whom it was credited for their liberation and their return to Jerusalem and the beginnings of the rebuilding of the temple, and all of this work was through Cyrus's decree and Cyrus's work. So much so that in the book of Isaiah 42 through 45, Cyrus is described and even mentioned by name in that sacred text. I mean, to put someone's name in their Jewish Bible, that was a big deal. And of
Mm,
course, they're writing it prophetically there. But even if it was just afterwards pointing back, to put a king's name in there, they must have had some significant impact, positive or negative, with the Jewish people. And Cyrus was a liberator. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Cyrus is the grandson of the Median king, and I cannot pronounce his name to save my life,
yeah,
but I
it's
put a
hard to.
reference to it in this week's e-site on our podcast. I mean, on our website. So if you want the references for this and the actual names, it's like a Styages or something like that. Anyway, I'm not a names scholar. I don't know how to pronounce his name. But anyway, when Cyrus was born as an infant, as a baby, Cyrus's great grandfather started having dreams that um that something was up with this baby and it was not good. It was a foreboding type of dream. And what he did was he called his royal priestly advisors to come and interpret the dreams he was having. Now, those royal Median and Persian priestly advisors, they were referred to as the Magi. That's what their name was. They were the Persian Magi, or in this case, the Median Magi. That's that culture. And what the Magi came and told the king, the way that they interpreted his dream, is that this child would grow up and usurp his throne and be a new kind of king. Instead of being a Median king, Cyrus would be a Persian king. It would usurp the Median Empire, put the Persian Empire on the map. Um, and so all of that. And so in response to this threat that Cyrus's grandfather felt as king, he actually attempted to murder baby Cyrus as an infant to try to prevent the competing king who had just been born from actually growing up and fulfilling those words of the Magi. All of these story details would have been known to Matthew's original audience. And so you
Mm,
have
mm,
Jesus growing up, the Persians showing up with their magi, coming to King Herod and saying, "Where's this king that was born?" Herod feeling threatened. So, with the Julian star, for the Romans, the author of Matthew is placing Jesus on the same level as Caesar. But with the Magi and the Herod dynamic and the intent to murder Jesus as a baby and that whole story, what the author of Matthew is doing is also placing Jesus in the same checking off all the boxes to put
Mm,
Jesus in the same context as Cyrus, who
mm,
was a great liberator for the Jewish people. Here were a people longing for deliverance from the Roman Empire, and here was Jesus with events surrounding his birth very similar to the events that took place around Cyrus's birth.
mm.
I think that's a stellar parallel.
Yeah, it ties in so completely. It's it's very well done, and
Which
it's
again points the way this is a liberation person. Whoever this baby
right.
is, it's about liberation. It's about justice. And if you subscribe to liberation theology, this is something that resonates at this point. This is a liberation story.
Yeah, that's right. And again, you're getting this story right around the time of the fall of Jerusalem. I mean, this is when Matthew is being written, is being written around that time, and so the author of Matthew is really trying to give people a lot of hope that this work of Jesus that was started back in 30s, the Common Era, is very much a work that is intended to continue and to move forward, that has the hand of God behind it, especially in light of the fact of the challenges that they face at the fall of Jerusalem and the scattering of the Jewish people.
Yeah, if this was written post destruction of Jerusalem, which most scholars do, that adds a whole new layer of people who were looking for hope, and
Hmm.
Matthew's author calling them to look to Jesus for that hope. If
Hmm.
if there's any of you watching this conversation and you would like more information, this book right here is invaluable. The Liberation of Christmas, The Infancy Narratives in Social Context by Richard Horsley. This is a fantastic book. He gives a lot of historical references on the information that I just shared.
Yeah, this is I for me again, these parallels that are mined out in these passages, for me again, just really center for me what the message of the Gospels are. There's just so much intention from the writers and what they're doing, that if once you see this, you can't help but recognize that the gospel stories that are to follow are very much in line with a work of justice and redemption and uh, restoration of marginalized and oppressed peoples. This is it just becomes so clear,
Yeah, it's
and so yeah, it just for me elevates the the uh, the wisdom of the scriptures um, and their intentionality.
yeah, so again, as you said earlier, someone could hear all this and their faith could be really rattled.
Hmm.
Or you could hear this and say, "Oh, that's the direction we're supposed to understand this story in." And it's a sad reality that this story has been co-opted to be a purely religious
Hmm.
interpretation, to be
Hmm.
interpreted purely religiously, and just about giving people assurance for what happens to them possibly when they die. That's not what the original intent of these stories were. These stories were written with the intent to give hope and direction to people who were being oppressed, who were
Yes.
being pushed down, and everything being extracted from them, and their city and their temple having been destroyed. These were stories written to point away, saying, that there's another option in the here and now. Don't It's not just about when you die. There's
Right.
political implications to the Jesus story. There's social implications to the Jesus story. There are economic implications to the Jesus story. And those were being contrasted with the violent, oppressive empire of Rome to the Jewish people at that time. And and pointing an alternative, pointing a different path, saying you can organize human community in a different way. There's a different way to go about doing life together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, like you said, it was centered in justice, and justice and love of neighbor, and concern, making sure there was enough for everybody, and resource sharing, I mean, you go, and when you start reading the Jesus story from that perspective,
Mm.
rather than the Jesus story answering the question, how can I get to heaven? If you start reading the Jesus story to answer the question, how can we make our world now here a safer,
Hmm.
more compassionate, just home for everyone, all of a
Hmm.
sudden there is so much more
Yes.
in the Jesus story than what we've seen before.
Yes. And it puts God front and center as being present in the current world situation and engaging and challenging the status quo of the current system and saying God is fighting for something different. God is moving, just like Cyrus went and liberated the Jewish people to start the rebuilding of a nation. uh, God is moving by sending Jesus into the world to create an alternative kingdom to the Empire of Rome. And this is this is a God who has not forgotten you. It may look like the world may look like God has forgotten you, and God has not forgotten you. The kingdom that that Jesus initiated is still at work in the world.
Hmm. Hmm. And the lectionary is going to go in the direction of Mark this year, right?
Hmm.
But it starts here with Matthew every year with the Epiphany. And where Matthew's gospel goes, Jesus has been compared, put on the same plane as Caesar. Now he's being likened to another Cyrus. Very quickly, the Gospel of Matthew is going to spend chapter after chapter, at least the first 5 or 6 chapters, now associating Jesus with Moses, who
Hmm.
is another in the here and now
Hmm.
liberator from
Yep.
Egyptian oppression and from Pharaoh, in the Jewish folklore. So
Mm.
again, Matthew is just so chocked full of this liberation justice theme, liberation for the
Mm.
oppressed, inclusion for the marginalized.
Yep. Powerful stuff. So yeah, let's take a moment to look at the other passage for this weekend, which is the baptism of
Yeah,
the
the
Lord.
baptism. And I don't I am so I'll be honest, I was so enamored with the Epiphany story this year that I didn't take a lot of time to even look at the baptism story, except for to note, and we've said this all throughout Advent season, this past season, is that the description in and Mark, in all the gospels, where Jesus is baptized, the language that's used, there is no way that that could have been mistaken by original audience who were Jewish listeners. There was no way they could have mistaked associating that with the language of Isaiah. And if I can find it here, maybe. Yeah, it's Isaiah. 42, 1 through 4. Just listen to the language here. It says, "Here is my servant." Think, a voice came from heaven. "You are my son, whom I love and whom I am well pleased." The Spirit descends on Jesus like a dove. The heavens are torn open. "Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one, whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him." And notice what the purpose is. "And he will bring justice to the nations. He will not cry out, he will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. And in his teachings, the islands will put their hope." That's
Mm.
a great passage for them to be associating Jesus's baptism with. This
Yeah.
is the this is the inauguration moment where Jesus, the Spirit is put on Jesus. And what do we know about that as Jewish listeners who are familiar with the book of Isaiah? Once again, it's one of those flag posts that directs our attention. Whoever this Jesus is, this story is about establishing justice for those who are oppressed.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I have on the baptism this week.
Yeah. It's just, when you start seeing this stuff, you, I mean, it just starts popping up everywhere, and it's so becomes so clear and obvious what 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 everyone who was living and writing in the time and in the short after period of Jesus' ministry, what they all understood him to be about. And
Hmm.
it's only as you get further, you start getting further away, and you start seeing other alternative narratives and theologies about Jesus starting to emerge. But when you look at those first three synoptic gospels and look at what they're doing, they are all from different perspectives, but all very much in lockstep about the justice ministry of Jesus.
Over the next 2 or 3 centuries, the church is going to make a radical embrace of the Roman Empire. A lot of people say that Rome embraced Christianity. I think it's more that like
Mm,
Christianity embraced Rome.
mm,
And when Christian through this process of Christianity doing this, a necessary transition is also occurring. For them to be able to do that, they have to spiritualize Jesus, make him purely a religious figure that is no longer a threat to the status quo. That's all about saving souls for heaven.
mm,
When the
mhm.
original Jesus community, original Jesus followers would have heard these stories and seen them for the threat that they really are.
Yeah, yeah,
And it would have been good news to them. They were looking for hope. They were
right.
looking for something in which to place their
That's
hope.
right. That's right. Oh, the Christian message for the oppressed and the marginalized started to lose all its power once it became part of the empire story.
Yeah,
As
once the
then,
social location changed.
yep, it, it became the Christian message became oppressive instead of liberating, and that's what we're still seeing today. And I don't know. I just over the holidays, I picked up different clips of so many Christian preachers still preaching a spiritualized Jesus, and talking about the Christmas story as a story about saving our souls. And boy, just just so much in contrast to what the scriptures actually say. Um, it's distressing how so much of Christianity is still missing this and is still being blinded by empire
Hmm.
and not seeing. this as the liberation movement that it is.
Yeah, on the flip side of that same exact coin, where you're seeing preachers still passing out tickets to heaven and trying to get people to say a sinner's prayer. And about 4 a.m. the other morning, I couldn't sleep, and I got out of bed and turned on the news and was just overwhelmed with how horrifically tragic the events of our world are presently, and how many
Mm-hmm.
people are suffering, and how many people are revolting, and how many people are standing up, and how much violence there is, and
Mm-hmm.
how squashing any type of positive change seems to be the norm, and the genocide of what's happening in Gaza, and
Mm-hmm.
just so much sad. And it's not just Gaza, it's all around the planet. There's so
Yeah.
much stuff happening. And then there was a little feeling inside of me where I remembered, this was a thought that I had: was the world much different
Mm-hmm.
in the wake of the destruction of Jerusalem?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus's message, both leading up to that tragic event and the Jesus followers' message in the wake of that tragic event, was a message that taught us that the best hope for our world, no matter how bad it gets, is still a world where we're choosing to love our neighbor, to practice the golden rule, to do to others how we would like them to treat others the way we'd like them to treat us, to do no harm, to love our neighbor as ourselves, to love our enemies, to practice nonviolence, to practice resource sharing rather than resource hoarding, to practicing a commitment of making sure those that are in our sphere of influence and control, that everyone has enough and has what they need to thrive. That all of these themes, Jesus's message of love your neighbor, it was in the context of a it wasn't shared in the context of a world where everything was going right. That was the
Right.
message that was answering the concerns when everything in the world was falling apart. And
That's
that
right.
seems pretty that resonates for me this year.
Yep.
There's a lot of heartache in our world right now, and the message still of the gospel
Mm-hmm.
is love your neighbor.
Mm-hmm. And we have to remember that as we go into a year of political campaigns
Oh my goodness.
and everybody talking about how they're going to make the world a better place by preserving and increasing American empire.
Yeah.
And
Keep an eye on this channel during election year to see how we wrestled to hold on to our nonprofit status. Oh, there will be lots we would like to say.
yeah, yeah. So, well, it's the new year.
Hmm.
It is it is the end of Christmas, the beginning of Epiphany, and um, it's a new opportunity to choose
Hmm.
to enter into the treachery of the story of Jesus
Hmm.
and to be a traitor for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of oppressed and marginalized people. We have that choice again as we enter this new year to either be co-opted by empire and to settle with the status quo, or to rise up and to do what we can in our local context, especially our local context, to be ambassadors of a better world. And
Yeah, a dear friend of mine was commenting in the same context, saying, when I look around the world today, it's really hard to wish people a happy new year when you know
mm,
how many people are suffering. It just feels threadbare.
mm,
And they said, what I'm doing this year instead is just saying this is a time for renewal and recommitment. It's a new
mm-hmm,
year. It's a time for
mm-hmm,
renewal, recommitment. And so, Todd, I want to renew my commitment to those themes that you just mentioned. That's what
mm,
we need to be about.
here, here.
All right, man. Anything else this week?
I think we're good. Good to be back together. Good to keep moving forward with these conversations, and we'll look forward to picking up next week. Remind us where all your material can be found, Herb?
Yeah, you can find everything that we're doing here on renewedheartministries.com. Renewed Heart Ministries is also on Twitter, well, X, or Twitter, whatever you're referring to it as, Facebook, Instagram. We're on the Meta's new threads. You can check out the Jesus for Everyone podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can again, you can find everything at renewedheartministries.com. You can just go there; it's your one-stop shop. But and I want to say this because we talked about this a little as the year was ending. I just want to say a special thank you to all of our supporters out there, especially those who have financially contributed to the work of Renewed Heart Ministries. We were able to meet our budget again here in 2020 at the end of 2023. So we're going to be in existence for another year. We've been going for about 17 years now. We're moving into our 18th. And again, we've never had more than what we need, but we've always had our needs provided. So I'm just thankful to all of you who value the work that we do on the margins of our faith communities and the work that we do for marginalized people that have experienced religious harm from misinformed theological interpretations, just the work of healing and love and compassion that we do at Renewed Heart Ministries. I just want to thank all of you who support that work, that see value in what we do, and just say thank you for being a part of Renewed Heart Ministries community.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We enjoy being with you. Look forward to hearing your comments, and we will look forward to seeing you next week.
Have a great week, everyone.